Hello and welcome to a new episode of EU Decoded, the podcast by the EPP Group in the European Parliament. Today we're bringing you the key takeaways from this past week's plenary session in Strasbourg. Members of Parliament debated migration, cyberbullying and Europe's growing housing crisis. But following the recent US-Israel military operations against the Iranian regime, we begin with one of the central debates of the plenary, the situation in the Middle East. With Iran launching long-range Shahed drone attacks against neighbouring countries, the question of a joint European air defence has become more urgent than ever.
Iran's crisis did not begin on the 28th of February. It began much earlier when this cruel and oppressive regime chose to wage war on its own people, when young protesters were shot in the streets, where women demanding freedom were beaten. So yes, we stand with the Iranian people. For years, the international community hoped that diplomacy would do the trick, and Europe tried diplomacy. We signed the nuclear deal, yet the regime continued building missile capabilities for reaching Athens, Bucharest and Sofia.
As MEP Jeroen Lanners points out, sanctions have not stopped the regime. Iran has continued to sponsor terrorism and destabilise the Middle East. It has also supplied weapons to Russia for use in Ukraine, and it remains a persistent nuclear threat.
So let's be honest, and I repeat this, the world is better off without this regime. And for the first time in decades, there might be a real possibility for change. But it's also risky. Military intervention without clear objectives or an exit strategy has the danger of instability, humanitarian suffering and regional escalation.
The crisis shows that the risk of wider conflict is no longer theoretical. Missile and drone threats are no longer confined to distant battlefields. With Russia's war against Ukraine on our borders and threats now reaching EU member states, like the recent Iranian drone attack on a British airbase in Cyprus, the EU must be prepared to protect its own territory. One thing is clear, Europe needs stronger air, missile and anti-drone defence capabilities. MEP Lanners also highlights the role of nuclear deterrence.
We have the nuclear umbrella that France provides and that strengthens our European deterrence. But we must also build common capabilities, drones, cyber brigade, missile shield, and ultimately a true European defence union. But strength also does not come only from capabilities. Security also means speaking with one voice.
Moving on to a different subject, and Europe must also speak with one voice on violence against women. This plenary session took place in the week following International Women's Day. And once again, the EPP Group put the spotlight on abuse against women, this time focusing on online abuse. At the invitation of Roberta Metsola, the keynote speech was delivered by Jackie Fox, a mother who lost her daughter Nicole, known as Coco, after years of relentless physical and online abuse. After successfully campaigning for Coco's law against cyberbullying in Ireland, her mission now is to make it an EU-wide law, a push the EPP Group strongly supports.
My beautiful daughter, Nicole, was a vibrant, funny, bubbly young woman. She was the light of every room with a huge smile, kind eyes, and always willing to help others. But Nicole, like so many others, were targeted by relentless physical and online abuse for 3.5 years. Why? Because of jealousy, drama, and because they could. They told her every day to die, go and hang yourself, slit your wrist, and everyone hates you. Why are you still here? Encouraging Nicole every day to kill herself.
After 3.5 years of physical and online abuse, Coco took her own life in 2018. In response to her tragic loss, Jackie Fox courageously led the campaign for Coco's law in Ireland, pioneering legislation that criminalises online harassment and harmful digital communications.
Even though social media was getting bigger and bigger, there was nothing in place to protect adults or children from these vicious attacks. I needed a focus, a plan, something to keep me here, something to get me out of bed every morning. So I decided to campaign to make online bullying a criminal offence. After 3 years of campaigning, On the 28th of December 2020, Coco's law was signed into the Irish statute books.
Since entering into force in 2021, Coco's law has become a benchmark in the fight against cyber violence and has inspired the EPP Group's call for stronger EU rules. As European Parliament President Roberta Metsola pointed out, the EU is making progress through laws directed at combating violence against women, but much more still needs to be done.
Around 1 in 3 young people in the EU have experienced cyberbullying, and we know that it falls disproportionately on women and girls. That is why this Parliament adopted the first ever EU directive on combating violence against women, with strong provisions against the worst forms of online abuse. Online abuse corrodes the very fabric of our public life, driving women out of the conversations that shape our societies. This chamber is all too familiar with the threats, the harassment, the relentless pressure. But when women step back from public life, all of Europe loses out.
While we're on the topic of stronger protection in the digital sphere, there is another important issue to address. This week, the Parliament approved an extension of the interim rules allowing online platforms to detect child sexual abuse material. Javier Zarzalejos, the EPP Group's lead negotiator on this file, highlighted the growing risks children face online.
The situation of children in the digital space in terms of risks and threats is deteriorating seriously, and we need a whole of society approach with a strong commitment and involvement of governments, industry and platforms, law enforcement, civil society and legislators. This is a simple principle that we have to translate into truly enforceable legislation.
The current rules allow platforms to detect both known and new illegal and abusive content, as well as attempts to groom children online. Well, these tools help authorities rescue children, prevent further abuse, and prosecute perpetrators. This week's vote was crucial. Without an extension before the 3rd of April deadline, platforms could have lost the legal basis to do this, creating a dangerous gap in the protection of children. MEP Lena Dupont reminded Parliament what happened the last time Europe faced a similar legal gap.
And we've seen what happens when this decision needs to be taken. In 2020, when companies were unsure whether detection was permitted under EU law, reports of abuse from EU-based accounts, and I emphasize that, dropped by 48% just in a few weeks. So let us be clear, a drop in reports does not mean a drop in abuse. It means fewer victims are identified and fewer perpetrators are stopped.
With the rapid development of AI, the need for effective detection rules is becoming increasingly urgent. For the EPP Group, it was also important that the existing safeguards remain in place. These include the protection of end-to-end encryption and the ban on general monitoring of users' communications. MEP Javier Zarzalejos made that point very clear.
Let me state in the strongest possible way that protecting children is not chat control. I find it absolutely regrettable and seriously misleading to speak about measures to protect children in such a dismissive and untrue way. But there might be some who advocate for a digital space with no rules, no limits and no responsibility, where hate speech spreads freely, where racism and threats go unchecked, all in the name of freedom. Certainly, that is not my option and not that of the EPP.
Another important decision was made this week in Strasbourg. Parliament adopted a report on the housing crisis in the EU, aimed at finding solutions for decent and affordable housing. The goal is clear. Europe must build and renovate homes faster to tackle the housing crisis.
Apoyar a quienes más lo necesitan. Los jóvenes que no pueden...
The priority, says MEP Borja Jimenez Lajas, is to support those who need it most. Young people who can't buy their first home, families struggling to pay rent, and essential workers such as teachers, doctors and police officers who can't afford to live near their workplace. MEP Nicolina Berniatz called on the European Commission to present a housing simplification package as soon as possible. The aim is to reduce bureaucracy, harmonise overlapping national rules, and accelerate the construction and renovation of homes. The goal, she says, is simple. Every young person in Europe should one day hold the key to their own home.
A naš zadatak je da svaki mladi čovjek u Europi drži ovaj ključ u rukama svog vlastitog doma.
Well, before we sign off, let's go back to the beginning of the week. The European Parliament's Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs agreed on Parliament's mandate for the new return regulation, a law aimed at speeding up the return of migrants who have no right to stay in the EU. The EPP Group has been adamant in its position that without an effective return system, the Migration Pact simply cannot work. François-Xavier Bellamy, the EPP Group's lead negotiator on the law, explains why Europe needs reforms to its return system.
And as EPP, our main priority has always been to land safely this proposal, because we need action now on the fight against irregular migration. The state of play, you all know it right now, is the following. On the return decisions issued all over Europe, only 20% are implemented. We are defending rule of law. Where is rule of law when 80% of the decisions taken by member states, taken by courts, are not followed by effective implementation? It is the reason why we need to change the content of the current legislation about returns.
MEP Thomas Tobé, Parliament's chief negotiator on the Migration Pact, highlighted the EPP Group's attempts to build an agreement at the political centre of the Parliament.
We cannot continue in this situation where we have only 1 out of 5 that actually returns. This cannot continue. And I must say that we have seen great work from the rapporteur, Asmani. He did everything possible. I would really like to highlight that. But for us, it became very clear. SND is unfortunately not ready to deliver on migration during this mandate. And we do hope that they will come to their senses, because I think it is very clear that citizens want us to have control on migration. There should be a difference if you get a yes or if you get a no. You don't have a right to stay in Europe if you have a return decision.
The EPP Group has tabled a political compromise that builds on the Commission's proposal and largely reflects what EU member states have already agreed in the Council. A compromise prepared with the urgency of the situation in mind. Well, from Europe's security and defence to online protection, housing and migration, the debates in Strasbourg this week show just how wide the challenges facing Europe truly are. But they also show a clear determination to act, to protect citizens, uphold the rule of law, and build a safer and stronger Europe. And that's all for this episode of EU Decoded. Make sure to follow the EPP Group on social media for all updates. And until next time, thanks for listening.